this is as spoiler free as I can get it, basically. But like, the plot is essentially Batman has been Batman in Gotham for about 2 years at this point. He is working with Detective Gordon and the Gotham Police Department at this point periodically. A lot of the other policemen don't like him. And, you know, I don't know, but they at least know he exists, right, at this point. So they're aware of him. He's been called in because the mayor got murdered in his own home, and there's a note left for the Batman at the crime scene. And so he gets brought in to start dealing with what fairly quickly we realize is a serial killer out to kill mobsters and corrupt government officials throughout Gotham. And the plot of the movie, for the most part, is really about Batman trying to solve that mystery and figure out who the mysterious, in this case, it is the Riddler, but figure out who the Riddler is, why they're doing what they're doing exactly, and stop them. And it's really very different from any Batman movie I think we've seen at any point so far. It's it actually takes the world's greatest detective idea a lot more seriously than a lot of previous Batman movies. It is like desperately trying to be a really dark and gritty noir type of film, and the tone is very much that. I mean, just that there's narration that is like very hard-boiled detective kind of noir narration at the beginning and a few other points throughout the film. It's interesting to me. It's a really, like, there are a lot of things about this movie that I really liked, and then there are actually also a lot of things that I really hated. So I kind of want to get into that. With some of those things, we'll get into spoilers. But before we do, Paul, Jen, what were your sort of initial reactions? Paul, I'll start with you.
So not getting into spoilers, I absolutely love this movie. This is, so my favorite rendition of any Batman on screen is the Batman the animated series from the 90s. And to me, that is what Batman is. And this is the closest thing that I've seen since get to that. And it surprised me, honestly. I was excited for it because of the trailers, like I said, but it was so much better than I was expecting. The score is fantastic. The cinematography is just some of the best I've seen in a superhero movie. And the story isn't necessarily a whodunit. It's a why they done it, yeah. Which was interesting, but also...
And what will they do next, I think.
Right. And why, yeah, all that stuff. And I am a sucker for noir detective crime movies. So this just ticked all of my boxes. And I am excited for however many more they make of these, because I'm there for them. This is the first time I have seen a movie in years where I am contemplating paying money to go watch it a second time in the theater. I that never happens. And the only thing I could think of is maybe The Fat Man. Maybe like
if you'd seen that in the theater, that would have been yeah.
But this is like I thinking about this movie, talking about it more with you guys now. It's just like I want to go see it again because it is that good.
Jen?
I also really enjoyed this movie. It wasn't like my favorite movie ever. I don't know that I would go so far as to say that I love this movie, but I think I could come to love this movie. It's long, and it's a lot to take in just one viewing.
Yeah.
I am 100% going to be watching it at least one more time. I am going to, okay, full disclosure. I have lost count of how many times I have watched Batman Begins, the Chris Nolan movie. And it kind of was with me through like a really tough part of my life. And so it holds like a really special place in my heart. But I think this one could give it a run for its money. I'm once again in a tough part of my life. And I went to the theater and watched this movie. And it has pathos to it. Like, I felt feelings, and it was good. It was a good movie. I want to keep feeling feelings and watching this movie.
Yeah, that is the biggest thing for me, is just this was in the era of Marvel BS that's just so bad. And there was a Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness trailer before this for my screening, and I am just whatever the opposite of excited is in the dictionary, I am that. But this has actually had an interesting story to tell, and in an interesting way that hasn't been done yet. And I'm so glad that DC has maybe just by been forced into this, but it actually trying different things and not just fancy CGI.
So let me run through a list of things that I liked and sort of I'm going to try to continue to do this without getting too much into spoilers, but I'll run through some of the things that I liked and some of the things I disliked, because I think I'm like probably of the three of us like the most down on this movie. And it's not, I want to be clear, like I don't like dislike it. I didn't think it was a bad movie. I thought just to a large extent, I feel like many of my criticisms are missed opportunities. Some things I think are genuinely bad. A thing that I disliked, I think the editing has a lot of problems. And I think the editing, the movie itself is 3 hours long. It could have easily been 2 hours and 20 minutes, somewhere in that territory, and you wouldn't have lost anything. In fact, you would have gained quite a bit in pacing, because for me, I think the movie struggles a lot with pacing, especially throughout the first hour and a half or so. And I'll talk, when we get into spoilers, I'll talk about why I think that is, because I think that there's I can't talk about it without spoiling like some of the kind of major plot points. I liked Robert Pattinson as Batman. Generally, I really loved Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman. I also surprisingly really like, well, I don't know about surprisingly, because I think Colin Farrell in general is a really top-notch actor. I like what they did with Penguin in this movie. I liked what in fact, I would broaden that out and say I liked what they did with Batman's rogues gallery in general, because they actually introduced a number of Batman, like classic Batman villains, but they didn't. They connected for the purposes of the plot and for the story of the film, but they weren't. It wasn't like the end of Batman Forever, or Batman and Robin, where there's like 17 different villains, all with their own plot and machinations and whatever. Like, it was literally just it was a pretty core story around the Riddler, but we still got to meet some of these other characters, and I think that was really smart, because I think that's a good way for them to leave themselves room for the future. They've introduced some people. They've introduced Penguin, for example, but not. And also, Penguin in this case is like the crime boss kind of Penguin. He's not a circus freak, circus performer kind of vibe. Nobody is in this movie, which is kind of interesting. Other things I didn't like. I did not particularly care for Paul Dano, to be honest. I did not particularly care for and in general, I think the third act has pretty major problems as well. And this is maybe nitpicky, but I don't understand why Batman is now bulletproof. There's elements of that where I thought it would have been cool, and like what you see in the trailer is cool, but they take it to a level where he's basically impenetrable from any angle, which doesn't make any sense for what they've actually established. And that ended up bothering me, because it ended up creating a situation where the stakes were undercut for Batman, which I didn't particularly care for. There are a handful of other things that we'll have to talk about in spoilers, but I think all in, like, I really liked the tone. I really liked, and Paul, you already nailed some of these things. The music is overwhelmingly great. It's a little bit monotonous in some parts, but I think, again, this is more due to the editing than the score. I think that, in a lot of ways, it gets to the feel, the mood of Batman the Animated Series as a detective story in a way that no other Batman on screen has done, at least since, Well, honestly, I would say ever in live action, because you can go back to like the Adam West stuff, but the tone is so different. And like he did a lot of detectiving, right? Like he did a lot of like crime solving, but it's so goofy that it's not really the same thing. This is like a David Fincher movie done, you know, with Batman, basically trying to solve problems. A lot of that worked really well. And I think that the overall story of politicians, like Gotham City politicians being in bed with the mob, I think is something that's, I mean, again, it's kind of a timeless Batman trope, but it's also like pretty, kind of present, right? Like it's pretty relevant to today.
Everyone hates corruption.
Yeah.
Until you're corrupt yourself, then you love it. But
yeah,